And you also have parathreads. Can you define those and differentiate them from the parachains?
Yeah, so parachains, as a term, it's evolved a little bit over time. But broadly speaking, parachains are these slots. They're like there's some number of them, and they're a little bit like computer cores. So your computer has a bunch of cores. I mean, this one that I'm on, I think, has 4, but some of them these days have 6 or 8 or even more. And the cores can process a particular application at once. So if you've got a bunch of windows open, then it might be that one of the cores is doing the video playing in one window, and another core is helping your web browser render the email in another window, and another core is playing your music in the background or whatever. So they can do different workloads. But basically, parachains are like this, but for a blockchain. So they can they do different workloads. One of them might be processing smart contract transactions. Another might be processing like balance transfers, like kind of Bitcoin transfer transactions. Another one might be doing governance. Another one might be calculating what the optimum staking situation is. So it can do each of these cores, each of these parachains can do different things at any given time, and we measure time in terms of blocks. So it's like this particular block number 1,470,293 is doing this. It's got a staking parachain, it's got a governance parachain, it's got a 2 or 3 smart contract parachains, and so on. Now, parathreads are when we say, right, well, this application doesn't need to be processing transactions literally every block. Maybe it only needs to process transactions every 10th block, right? So instead of it happening every 6 seconds, it's every minute. Now that's perfectly reasonable. Bitcoin doesn't process transactions. Some of the time it takes an hour before the transactions go through. On average, should be about 10 minutes. So it's not unreasonable to expect that probably one block in every 10 is sufficient for quite a lot of use cases. So then we say, right, well, rather than having this application just constantly, always taking up one of these processing slots, even when maybe it doesn't have that many transactions to process, instead, what we do is we say, right, well, you don't get any by default. But when you're ready to process some transactions, when you've got a bunch in your queue and you I don't know, they're important enough, or they've been waiting long enough, or whatever, then you pay a bit of money, but only a little bit, and they get processed. You sort of just push them bulk onto the Polkadot sort of network, and you get a block. It's like you get in one of these Polkadot blocks, you get your block being processed, you get your block of transactions through.
And you gave an example of how Bitcoin only has a block every 10 minutes, but what types of projects do you see as wanting, to be on a parathread as opposed to a parachain? Can you give some examples? Yeah,
there's a few. So one of them would be an oracle. So you can imagine there will be some oracle situations. They're feeding in data from the external world. Now, feeding in a load of data every 6 seconds seems overkill for a lot. I mean, if you're talking about weather data, you don't need to update the weather every 6 seconds, right? Maybe once an hour, I don't know, once a day. But yeah, definitely not every 6 seconds. 500 raindrops have fallen, 493 more raindrops have fallen. No. So, we can imagine that actually, and with weather, it's like, maybe once an hour, once every half hour tops. And maybe it doesn't matter whether it's, literally 30 minutes to the dot after the last update. Maybe it's okay for it to be like 31 minutes after the last update. There's no huge time deadline. And that would be a really good one for parathreads, because, they would just basically have some amount of money, or of tokens or whatever, that they want to pay in order to get their new block of weather information, their update in, and then they just wait until the chain of Polkadot is sufficiently unused, underutilized, and then their block will go in. A little bit like how transactions work in Bitcoin and Ethereum right now. So you've got a transaction fee, and maybe it sticks around for a block or 2 or 3 until a miner picks it up, because there aren't enough other transactions that are paying more. So very similar in that regard, basically just an adaptive market.